So for the first section of this process, we started modeling the rock in 3ds Max using a box, and then by converting it to an editable poly. From here, we simply connected edges and manipulated them until we got the shape that we wanted. Once we were happy with the shape of our rock and we got it to around 500 triangles, we then exported it as an object file. We then launched ZBrush R7 and we opened up a new document and imported our rock into the scene. We then drew the rock onto the canvas by clicking and dragging and holding down Shift, releasing simultaneously. We then clicked Edit in order to edit the object. If at this stage you keep drawing out new versions of your rock, it's because you haven't clicked Edit and you are merely redrawing the object out into the scene. To clear the canvas, press Ctrl N, click and drag out the rock again, and then press Edit to enter edit mode. To start sculpting, we converted the material to matcap grey, and under geometry we subdivided up the geometry. We navigated our way around the scene by clicking and dragging an open space to rotate, by holding down Alt and clicking and dragging an open space to move, and by holding down Alt, clicking and dragging and releasing to zoom in and out. To begin sculpting, we selected the clay buildup brush shortcut BCB brush clay buildup, and we began to use circular patterns to click and sculpt onto our mesh. We held down Alt to sculpt into the model, and we held down Shift to smooth out sections of the model. We shouldn't smooth too many sections out of our rock. Once we've completed the sculpt of our rock, we return to our low poly rock in 3ds Max, ready to unwrap it. We unwrap the rock by selecting the Unwrap UVW modifier and by selecting all of the polygons and clearing them first with a planar map. After that, we selected the edge and went down to point seam and started selecting the relevant points of the model. The points of the model should reflect what you did with unwrapping a box for the first time in the first year. Look for the three edged points of the model and simply join them together like so, leaving one side without an edge on so that you can peel the model apart. From there, we hit Pelt. We then hit Start Pelt and stop and relax the UVs like so. If the UVs need further relaxing, we go to Tools, Relax. We then scaled them down and docked them in the top left corner of our document. This was to allow other UVs to be placed in the texture space. Once the unwrap was complete, we collapsed the unwrap modifier and once again exported the low poly rock as an object file. Back in ZBrush, we then renamed our sculpt of the rock to high poly rock to save confusion, and we were then ready to import the low poly rock. We then imported the low poly rock by selecting Cylinder 3D and clicking on Import, and then located our rock object file. Under the high poly rock subtool, we then appended the low poly rock like so. We then transferred the details of our high poly to our low poly by using the project function. To use this, we subdivided our low poly rock. With this low poly rock still selected, made the high poly rock visible. We then started with a high scan distance of 1 and hit Project All. We now notice that the low poly rock had changed its shape to be closer to that of the high poly rock. With the low poly rock still selected, we continued this process. Subdivide and project. We continued this process all the way until the low poly rock had a similar resolution to that of the high poly rock. The more we subdivided the low poly rock, the lower the scan distance needed to be. We use a lower scan distance for smaller details and tighter results. With the low poly rock fully projected and more or less exactly the same as its original high poly sculpt, we hide the high poly sculpt and we are now ready to export the normal maps of the low poly sculpt. To do this, we go to Geometry and select the lowest subdivision. Remember, this is of the low poly sculpt. We go to UV map and make sure that we have 4096 selected. We then go to normal map and make sure that we have flip green channel selected. This is because ZBrush reads its maps differently to 3ds Max. We then create normal map. Your normal map should be successfully created if you have selected the lowest subdivision of your low poly rock and if your low poly rock has an unwrap. If it doesn't, then please repeat the previous steps. Once this map is created, we are going to export it. To do this, you want to press Clone NM, go to Texture, flip V. This will flip the texture vertically so that Max can read it, and then export it as a PNG file. With our unwrapped low poly rock in 3ds Max, we are now ready to put on our normal map texture. To do this, make sure that you are on high quality and that you have configured your viewport to allow for maximum resolution of 4096 and high quality. Make sure you press apply and OK. We then go to the material editor and we apply our normal map in the bump map slot like so. Bump to 100, normal map, bitmap, and then we select our texture. With the texture selected, make sure that the gamma is set to override. Press open. Click and drag the material onto your model, and if you can't see it activated, go to Views, Show Materials and Viewport as Realistic Materials with Maps. You should now see normal map information on your low poly rock.